Tantor Audio presents The King in Love, Edward VII's Mistresses, by Theo Aronson, narrated by Shaun Grindell. Prologue. The Prince of Pleasure. 1. Whatever is most seductive. The occasions which Queen Victoria had come to dread, almost above all others, were her audiences with Mr. Gladstone. There she would sit, small, plump, and high-coloured, with her white widow's veil cascading down her back, while her Prime Minister, whom she never allowed to sit, held forth in his hectoring fashion. Nothing seemed able to stop his flow. He would address her, it was said, as though she were a public meeting. Whereas Mr. Disraeli used to chat about watercolour painting or the third cousinship of German princess, Mr. Gladstone, so runs one inimitable account of these audiences, harangues her about the policy of the Hittites, or the harmony between the Athanasian Creed and Homer. The Queen, perplexed and uncomfortable, tries to make a digression, addresses a remark to her daughter, or proffers a biscuit to a begging terrier. Mr. Gladstone restrains himself with an effort till the princess has answered or the dog has sat down, and then promptly resumes. I was about to say. Meanwhile, the flood has gathered force by delay, and when it bursts forth again, it carries all before it. The subject upon which Gladstone was expounding one March morning, in the year 1872, was his master plan for the Queen's heir, the 30-year-old Prince of Wales. This, in turn, was an aspect of a still more extensive subject, which the Prime Minister had entitled The Royalty Question. For some time now, Gladstone had been worried about the public image of the British monarchy. A dedicated monarchist, he was afraid that the institution was in danger of losing its appeal. To speak in rude and general terms, he confided, with rare succinctness to a colleague, the Queen is invisible, and the Prince of Wales is not respected. About the Queen's invisibility, there was nothing that the Prime Minister could do. Ever since the death of her adored husband, the Prince Consort, over a decade before, Queen Victoria had withdrawn from public life almost completely. All Gladstone's efforts to force her out of her seclusion had proved fruitless. The more robustly he insisted that the Queen show herself, the more resolutely she refused to do any such thing. Her Prime Minister's interference with the Queen's personal acts and movements was really abominable, she exclaimed. Was she to be driven and abused till her nerves and health give way with this worry and agitation and interference in her private life? Against this blend of obstinacy and indignation, even Gladstone was powerless. In the Widow of Windsor, the grand old man had met his match. The repellent power which she so well knows how to use has been put in action towards me, he grumbled. But, never one to abandon a cause, the Prime Minister now turned his attention to that other aspect of the royalty question, the public life of the Prince of Wales. If the Queen was not prepared to play her royal role, then the heir apparent must be allowed to play his. Yet the exact nature of that role was difficult to define. What was an heir apparent supposed to do? In the past, the Prince of Wales' predecessors, those wayward Hanoverian princes, had invariably set themselves up in political opposition to the monarch. But this prince, for all his feelings of frustration, would never have done that. So the problem remained unresolved. This dilemma sighed the prince's private secretary, was inherent in the very nature of sovereignty. It has been the same thing with heirs apparent from time immemorial, and I fear will continue to be so as long as there are monarchies. He was right. To this day, the question has not been satisfactorily answered. There is no set-out role for me. The prince's great-great-grandson, Prince Charles, was to complain over a century later. It depends entirely on what I make of it. But Queen Victoria's heir was not allowed to make anything of it. The perennial difficulty was intensified by her own unyielding attitude. The prince was left with no worthwhile occupation, because this was precisely how his mother wanted it. This had not always been her attitude. During their eldest son's boyhood, Victoria and Albert, all aglow with good Coburg intentions, had decreed that Bertie, as he was known in the family, ought to be accustomed early to work with them, to have great confidence shown him, that he should be early instructed into the affairs of state. Their admirable resolve had been short-lived, in spite of, or rather because of, a system of educational force-feeding. Bertie had never matched up to their exacting standards. He had emerged from these years of intensive study as an amiable, but far from intelligent, young man. Of Prince Albert's earnestness, industriousness, and high-mindedness he showed no trace. He lived, the disapproving Queen would point out, purely for pleasure. Not even when his father had died did his mother revise her poor opinion of Bertie's abilities. In any case, the broken-hearted widow was determined that no one, and certainly not her backward heir, should play the political role that her adored angelic husband had once done. Not only did she consider her son to be lacking in intellect, but she found him irresponsible, immature, and indiscreet. The Queen would neither confide in him nor consult him. The prince must see nothing, she warned her ministers, of a confidential nature. When one prime minister asked if the heir might be allowed to know anything of importance that took place in the cabinet, her answer was a firm no. That would be quite improper. The prince had no right, she would announce blandly, to meddle. Nor would she dream of allowing him to represent her in public. Properly speaking, no one can represent the sovereign but her, she once informed a Home Secretary. Her Majesty thinks it would be most undesirable to constitute the heir to the crown a general representative of herself, and particularly to bring him forward too frequently before the people. This would necessarily place the Prince of Wales in a position of competing, as it were, for popularity with the Queen. Nothing should be more carefully avoided. In short, it was a hopeless situation. Denied the opportunity either of working with his mother in private or representing her in public, the prince was obliged to lead an aimless existence. Yet the Queen would cite that very aimlessness as justification for not giving him anything worthwhile to do. But despite his shortcomings, and there was some substance in the Queen's complaints, the Prince of Wales was not nearly as worthless as his mother imagined. He had considerable diplomatic gifts, great panache, and exceptional vitality. These qualities could have been of real service to his mother. Given some active employment and some real responsibility, there was no reason why the Prince of Wales could not have been a credit to the monarchy. This was certainly Gladstone's view. While appreciating that the prince was no paragon, the Prime Minister was alive to his good points. The prince's social ease and sense of showmanship were exactly the qualities which Gladstone found so disturbingly lacking in the Queen. "He would make an excellent sovereign," he once said. "He is far more fitted for that high place than her present Majesty now is." It was by making use of the Prince's social talents that Gladstone hoped to compensate for the Queen's regrettable absence from the public stage. Facing her on that early spring day in 1872, the Prime Minister unveiled his plan for a remodelling of the heir apparent's life. The Prince of Wales must become the Queen's permanent representative in Ireland. In other words, her viceroy. In this way, he would be given a worthy and manly mode of life, and at least one leading member of the royal family would be seen to be pulling his weight. And just think of the good it would do for permanently troubled Ireland. The Queen would not hear of it. Within a day or two of the audience, she had returned the ponderously worded memorandum with which Gladstone had backed up his arguments. The scheme was acceptable to neither Her Majesty nor His Royal Highness. The Queen had always considered it a stupid waste of time to try and connect the royal family with Ireland, and the Prince of Wales would prefer some employment nearer home. The truth was that Bertie had no intention of exchanging the sophistication of London for the provincialism of Dublin. But Queen Victoria's blunt rejection did nothing to deter the tenacious Gladstone. Warming to his task, he worked out a still more elaborate plan. This he presented in the form of a long letter in July 1872. Now, not only should the Prince represent the Queen in Dublin, but he should deputize for her the London season and spend 1 month each autumn with the army. To this even longer, more presumptuous, and more insulting memorandum, the Queen gave an even more crushing reply. She ended by declaring that this was a question which more properly concerns herself to settle with the members of her family as occasions may arise. In other words, it was none of Gladstone's business. By now, anyone else in the kingdom would have let the matter drop, but not Gladstone. Announcing that he had not yet discharged his full responsibility in the matter, he ploughed remorselessly on. This time he sent the Queen 2 communications, a letter in which, under 2 headings, he again discussed his plans for a reshaping of the Prince's life, and an even longer memorandum in which, under 6 headings, he set out to prove that the Queen's objections to his scheme were unfounded. Victoria was astonished. Once again she gave him a short shrift. The Queen therefore trusts, she wrote firmly, that this plan may now be considered as definitely abandoned. Incredibly, it was not. Gladstone wrote a 4th time, mercifully reducing to 5 the number of headings, by which he refuted the Queen's arguments. A brief note from Her Majesty informed him that it was useless to prolong the discussion. Finally beaten, the unconvinced Gladstone contented himself with bemoaning the fact that his views had been so unequivocally disapproved by Your Majesty in a matter of so much importance to the interests of the monarchy. The Queen's final verdict on the project was characteristically forthright. Whenever she had a strong conviction about something, she told the Foreign Secretary. She generally found she was right. So the Prince of Wales remained unemployed. Never again would any serious attempt be made to find him something to do. Now and then a sympathetic Prime Minister might pass him some information, but it was not until 1892, when the Prince was over 50, that he was finally given unrestricted access to all official papers. But not even his most dedicated apologist could pretend that his lack of any meaningful employment was the only reason for the prince's frivolous way of life. Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, was a hedonist, from the crown of his already balding head to the soles of his elegantly shod feet. Ever since his marriage, in 1863, to the beautiful Princess Alexandra of Denmark, had given him his independence, the prince had lived in what Queen Victoria called a whirl of amusements. By the 1870s, he had established himself as the most fashionable figure in European society. His lack of good looks — he was short, plump, bulbous-eyed, and weak-chinned — were admirably compensated for by his stylish clothes and engaging manner. That thinning hair was invariably covered by a sharply tilted hat. His flaccid lips and receding chin were disguised by a neatly trimmed beard and moustache. His thickening waist was minimized by superb tailoring. The fashionable cut and often daring fabric of his suits ensured that he never looked insignificant. He was regarded, in the jargon of the day, as a heavy swell. He loved uniforms. Few things delighted him more than sporting the dress uniforms of those honorary colonelships and admiralships so readily bestowed upon him by foreign sovereigns. His charm and geniality were exceptional. Warm human kindness, wrote one foreign secretary, were the very substance of the man. He had a genuine desire to please. He loved to be surrounded by happy faces. His thoughtfulness toward servants, his politeness toward strangers, his loyalty towards his friends were legendary. Except in the presence of his formidable mother, the prince's demeanour was one of complete self-assurance. The pace of his life was frenetic, easily bored, averse to reading, wary of intellectual talk, lacking in application, hating desk work, unappreciative of serious music, or anything other than the most blandly representational painting. He flung himself into a ceaseless round of amusements. Between rising early and going to bed late, he filled every minute of his day. There were, of course, minor public duties of the foundation stone-laying, exhibition opening variety to be carried out, but by far the greater part of his time was spent in a relentless pursuit of pleasure. He was seen everywhere, at balls, banquets, and garden parties, at Goodwood, Doncaster, or Ascot for the races, at Cowes for the yachting, on country estates for the shooting, at Covent Garden or Drury Lane, at his own club, the Marlborough, which he had founded after he had fallen foul of stuffier establishments, such as White's and the Travellers, playing baccarat, attending dinner parties or more intimate supper parties, visiting pleasure gardens, music halls, or nightclubs. None of this is to say that the Prince of Wales was indistinguishable from any other roistering youngish man about town. He never let anyone forget who he was, no matter how informal the occasion, how drunken the company, or relaxed the atmosphere. He was very conscious of his dignity. Even his closest companions faced the dilemma of all those who are befriended by members of the royal family, then and now, where to draw the line between friendliness and familiarity. With the prince, it was a very nicely positioned line indeed. While joining wholeheartedly in the pranks and practical jokes, he would freeze at any undue show of presumption or disrespect. Then his pale blue-grey eyes would turn steely, and his celebrated affability evaporate. Once, when an acquaintance with whom he was playing billiards greeted a bad shot with a jocular pull-yourself-together wails, the prince promptly sent for the man's carriage. On another occasion, when he gently reproved a badly behaved guest by saying, "Freddie, Freddie, you're very drunk," and the guest retaliated, using the prince's forbidden nickname, and imitating his rolling R's with, "Tum-tum, you're very fat," the prince ordered the guests' bags to be packed before breakfast. Yet the fear of exposing himself to over-familiarity never prevented him from choosing his friends from the widest, most unlikely circles. Quite naturally, he moved amongst the great aristocratic families, or at least those families who were rich enough to entertain him and amusing enough to divert him. But he was just as ready to befriend anyone whom he found interesting. Both the Prince and Princess of Wales were refreshingly free of social and religious bigotry. To their homes, Marlborough House in London and the Sandringham House in Norfolk, were invited a great company of the witty, the worldly, or the simply attractive. The Prince had a penchant for rich, self-made men, Jewish bankers, South African millionaires, American manufacturers, Midlands industrialists. "I find the company pleasant and civil," wrote Bishop Magee of Peterborough, after arriving at Sandringham one day in December 1873. "But we arc a curious mixture. 2 Jews, Sir Anthony de Rothschild and his daughter, an ex-Jew, Disraeli, a Roman Catholic, Colonel Higgins, an Italian Duchess who is an Englishwoman, brought up a Roman Catholic and now turning Protestant, a set of young lords, and a bishop." The Prince's life, for all its variety and restlessness, was lived within a strict framework. The most punctual and punctilious of men, he insisted on a regular routine. His year followed an unvarying pattern. January and February were spent at Sandringham, shooting and entertaining that kaleidoscopic collection of guests. From the beginning of March, he spent 5 weeks, en garçon, on the French Riviera, including a few days' stay in Paris at either end. During the summer, he was in London for the season. In August, he spent a couple of weeks yachting at Cowes, sometimes accompanied by Princess Alexandra, but more often alone. He enjoyed a much-needed cure at some German or Austrian spa. By October, he was grouse shooting or deer stalking in Scotland, and by November he was back at Sandringham. And wherever he was, either at home or abroad, he would indulge in the one activity which he preferred above all others. For more than racing, shooting, yachting, gambling, or eating, the Prince of Wales enjoyed making love. Even before the days of the long-lensed camera and the 24-hour press vigil, a prince's intimate moments were the subject of close scrutiny and intense interest. There was always a companion to pass on a bit of gossip, an equerry to make a report, or a diarist to jot down an entry. So even if the general public was unaware of the full extent of the Prince of Wales' amorous escapades, they did not go unnoticed in his own circles. Bertie was not quite 14 when his dawning interest in the opposite sex first became apparent. In 1855, Queen Victoria, accompanied by Prince Albert and their 2 eldest children, the Princess Royal and the Prince of Wales, paid a state visit to Paris. At the brilliant court of the Second Empire, presided over by the worldly Napoleon III and the beautiful Empress Eugenie, and the beautiful Empress Eugenie, the young prince first experienced a way of life which he would one day make his own. In the person of the Emperor of the French, Bertie discovered an adult who accepted him for what he was. Here was someone who seemed to take an unashamed delight in the things in which he delighted, who loved show and colour and movement, who lived quite naturally and openly for pleasure. To the youngster, whose life had always been narrow, repressed, and dedicated to self-improvement, Napoleon III's tolerance and sense of enjoyment were a revelation. This, surely, was how life was meant to be lived. It was during this state visit that Bertie's great love of France was born. The splendour of the French capital, the liveliness of the French people, the bonhomie of the French emperor, the elegance of the French empress, all made an indelible impression on his pleasure-hungry nature. From now on, it would be towards France, rather than towards Germany, so admired by the rest of his family, that his personality was to be oriented. From the time of his first visit to Paris until the establishment, almost 50 years later, of the Entente Cordiale, he never ceased to work for an understanding between Great Britain and France. But more, perhaps, than anything, it was the presence of the ladies of the court that set the boy's blood pounding so disturbingly. The young empress, so beautiful herself, liked to be surrounded by equally beautiful women, in their swaying crinolines, and with artificial flowers tucked into their coiffures. These chattering, free and easy demoiselles d'honneur were quite different from his mother's staid ladies-in-waiting. In the Tuileries, notes one Frenchman, he breathed for the first time that odore di femina, whose trail he was to follow for the rest of his life. The scented, seductive women not only kissed him, was he not a child, but also curtsied to him, and as they bent forward, their décolletage revealed delights that were veiled at Windsor. Within 2 years, the 15-year-old boy was giving more tangible evidence of his appreciation of female attractions. In the course of what was meant to be an educational tour of his father's beloved Rhineland, Bertie, flushed with too much wine, kissed a pretty girl in public. Fortunately, news of the incident, which Gladstone described as a squalid little debauch, did not reach the ears of the Prince Consort. That highly moral parent would almost certainly have ordered his son home before any more Rhine maidens led him into heaven knows what depths of depravity. Not that the prince would have had the opportunity for the plumbing of any such depths. He was too closely supervised for that. Nor, frankly, would he have known how to take advantage of any such opportunity. For in spite of his interest in pretty women, Bertie was still sexually immature. His parents, in their misguided efforts to shield him from temptation, had never left him alone with his contemporaries. Victoria was haunted by a great fear of young and carefully brought-up boys mixing with older boys, and indeed with any boys in general, for the mischief done by bad boys, and the things they may hear and learn from them, cannot be overrated. Albert was even more apprehensive. In his conviction that boys, left to themselves, would talk lewdly, he was determined that Bertie should associate only with those who are good and pure. So the prince was almost 17 before he asked his tutors about the meaning of certain words. Quite clearly, he was entirely ignorant about the facts of life. His answer was a lecture on the purpose and, even more important, the abuse of the union of the sexes. To prevent the young man from being tempted into any such abuse, he was kept well away from those aristocratic young bloods who would, in the ordinary way, have been his natural companions. Both at Oxford and Cambridge, where he spent short and generally unproductive spells, he was obliged to live out of college so that he could be protected from the more rakish elements of undergraduate life. On his various cultural tours of the continent, and even during his more exciting tour of Canada and the United States in 1860, Bertie was closely watched. His plea that he be allowed to join the army was firmly turned down by his governor, the dour General Bruce. The temptation and unprofitable companionship of military life, warned Bruce, were to be avoided.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?